Cannes, France, 2003. A brand new 74-foot catamaran sits in the harbor, gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, custom built, unlike anything the yachting world has ever seen on this stretch of coastline. Nobody comes aboard. Not one visitor climbs the boarding ladder. The most powerful buyers in the industry walk past it like it isn't even there, like it's furniture, not a vessel worth millions of dollars in design and engineering. Because to them, it isn't a yacht at all. It's a joke wearing a yacht's paint job. For a century, the rule in yachting had been treated as physics, not opinion. Catamarans are for rental fleets and weekend sailors, not for royalty, not for billionaires, not for anyone with real money to spend on something meant to impress. The man standing on that dock in Cannes had just spent everything he had, his savings, his other business, years of his life, proving that rule wrong, and the industry's answer to him was silence. Experts told him directly to his face that his company wouldn't survive 2 years. It would take him 2 more years just to find a single buyer for that first boat, sitting unsold, unwanted, while he watched competitors sell monohulls a fraction as innovative. But that failed showcase in Cannes wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment right before the turn. Because 2 decades later, that same joke of a boat category would be building 140-foot super yachts commissioned by Formula One champions, and the man who almost got laughed out of the harbor would be running one of the most prestigious shipyards on earth. This is how Francis Lapp built Sunreef, and how an industry that mocked him for 2 years spent the next 20 trying to catch up. Rewind further, back before Gdansk, before Cannes, before any of it. Lapp isn't a boat builder. He's an electrical engineer from a small town near Mulhouse, in the French region of Alsace, born in 1958. His early career has nothing to do with the sea at all. He builds switchgear cubicles, the industrial boxes that regulate power systems, for clients like Siemens and Coca-Cola. He spends part of his 20s working construction projects in Saudi Arabia. He is, by every measure available at the time, an industrial engineer with a taste for risk and a knack for spotting opportunity in unglamorous places. Not a yachtsman, and certainly not a future billionaire of the sea. The pivot happens almost by accident. In the early 1990s, Lapp relocates to Poland to grow his electrical business in a country still shaking off decades of communism, a country most of his friends back in France consider a strange, risky bet. While he's there, something unexpected hooks him completely: rally racing. He competes in off-road championships. He falls for the country itself, its potential, its hunger, its cheap and skilled labor force emerging from a collapsed state economy. And somewhere in that same restless period, he discovers sailing, specifically small, fast Hobie Cat racing catamarans. In 1996, he competes in the Polish Hobie Cat Championships and finishes 6th. At this point, it is a hobby, nothing more. Yet, here's the first open loop worth sitting with. A switchgear manufacturer who happens to enjoy racing small catamarans on weekends is about to become the most important name in luxury, multi-hull yachting in the world. Nobody watching him race a Hobie 16 in the mid-90s would have guessed what comes next, not even Lapp himself. As his electrical business in Poland grows, so does his buying power. At the Paris Boat Show, Lapp purchases his first real cruising catamaran and has it shipped all the way to Madagascar. He opens a small charter company on the Indian Ocean, renting the boat and others like it to clients chasing the same fantasy he'd chased. But the clients keep asking for more. Bigger boats, more comfortable interiors, more luxurious finishes than anything currently on the water. So Lapp goes looking for exactly that kind of catamaran to buy and add to his fleet. He can't find one anywhere in the world. Every catamaran on the market in the late 1990s is built to the same low ceiling. Fiberglass hulls, functional layouts, nothing close to the custom, 5-star interiors already standard on traditional monohull super yachts. And this is the exact moment the entire company is born from. Not grand ambition, but plain frustration. If nobody would build the boat Lapp wanted for his own charter fleet, Lapp decided he would simply build it himself. In 2000, he makes the leap. Stop chartering catamarans, start manufacturing them. He leases construction halls inside the former Gdansk shipyard, the same shipyard, incidentally, where Poland's future president Lech Wałęsa once worked as an electrician before helping bring down communism from the inside. Lap chooses Gdansk deliberately. Deep naval traditions stretching back centuries, a skilled workforce, and an entire city hungry for industrial work after the original shipyard's post-communist collapse. In 2002, construction begins on the very first Sunreef hull. Medium loop open. Lap is about to build a boat nobody in the yachting establishment believes should exist. Will it even work? On July 25, 2003, the first vessel finally launches. A 22.5-meter, 74-foot ocean-going catamaran, designed alongside naval architects Van Petegem Loriot Prevost, christened by Polish singer Anna Maria Jopek. It's the world's first luxury catamaran built with a flybridge, an elevated centralized helm station that adds an entire extra deck of usable living space above the waterline. Nothing remotely like it exists anywhere else on the water. And then comes Cannes, the debut everyone was supposed to remember for the right reasons. Instead, the silence on the dock, the empty boarding ladder, the 2 years it takes just to find a single buyer willing to gamble on an unproven brand from an unproven country. Here's what almost nobody outside the company knows about those 2 years. Lap doesn't retreat. He doesn't shrink the vision or quietly pivot back to something safer and more familiar to buyers. He keeps building, keeps refining every detail of the interior and the systems, and waits for the market to catch up to something he already understood in his bones. That comfort and performance were never actually in conflict on the water. They just needed someone stubborn enough to prove it, boat by boat, showing by showing, rejection by rejection. The proof finally arrives through an unlikely partner. Laurent Bourgnon, a celebrated Swiss offshore sailor with real credibility in the sailing world, becomes the buyer of Sunreef's second vessel, a 70-foot power catamaran launched in 2008, developed with Bourgnon's direct. It becomes the brand's first power cat, and it's genuinely groundbreaking. A double-deck power catamaran with the kind of transoceanic range nobody expected a multi-hull to deliver. Lap later calls it one of the defining boats in the company's entire history, the moment skepticism started quietly turning into curiosity. Pattern interrupt. The timing here matters more than it looks on the surface. 2008 is the exact year the global financial system collapses. Luxury yacht builders across Europe and North America begin declaring bankruptcy one after another as wealthy clients suddenly freeze their spending overnight. Sunreef, a company that had barely found its footing after years of rejection, should have died in that recession. By every reasonable expectation, it should have been another casualty. It isn't. While rival shipyards shut their doors, Sunreef keeps growing. Nobody at the company will fully explain why the crash didn't sink them, but the timing lines up with something else happening at the exact same moment. The new power catamaran line was opening an entirely different customer base, just as the traditional sailing luxury market contracted under the weight of the recession. The diversification that looked reckless back in 2003 becomes the very thing that keeps the lights on in 2008. By 2013, Sunreef has grown from a skeptical dockside curiosity into a real functioning operation. 450 employees, up from just 130 in 2005. That same year, Lap is named Entrepreneur of the Year at the World Yacht Trophies during the Cannes Yachting Festival, the exact same festival where, a decade earlier, not a single buyer would set foot on his boat. Callback. Remember Cannes 2003? The silence, the empty dock, the humiliation of a debut nobody wanted to witness? 10 years later, that same festival is applauding him on stage. The company keeps pushing size and innovation simultaneously, refusing to settle into a comfortable niche. In 2010, Sunreef launches SY Che, at the time its largest yacht ever built, stretching nearly 35 meters stem to stern. Later, the Sunreef 102 Ifara becomes the world's first double-deck sailing catamaran, and the Sunreef 114 Che becomes the largest sloop-rigged catamaran ever constructed. Each new launch pushes the same underlying argument further into undeniable territory. multi-hulls were never a compromise. In many ways, they're simply a better way to build a super yacht. New curiosity injection. It isn't just raw size that separates Sunreef from every legacy shipyard around it. It's what's happening inside the hulls themselves. LAP becomes obsessed with sustainability years before it becomes an industry buzzword anyone else takes seriously. 6 years ago, I started thinking about building an electric boat, he later admits. Sunreef begins integrating composite solar panels directly into yacht hulls and superstructures, a system that eventually wins the UIM Environmental Award. The Sunreef 60E is recognized as the best electric sailboat at the Gustave Trouvé Awards. A full eco range follows, built for owners who want uncompromising luxury without the environmental guilt that has quietly trailed the superyacht industry for decades. That environmental pivot ends up doing something else entirely. It attracts exactly the kind of clientele that money alone could never buy. Formula One world champion Fernando Alonso becomes a Sunreef Eco brand ambassador and personally commissions a 60 Sunreef Power Eco Catamaran. Tennis legend Rafael Nadal joins the growing client list. So does former F1 driver Nico Rosberg. These aren't people who need convincing that a product is good. These are people whose public reputations depend entirely on choosing correctly. And again, they're choosing Sunreef. By the 2020s, the company that couldn't get a single visitor onto its Cannes debut boat is running a shipyard with 8 full-build hulls, an in-house carpentry department, a dedicated paint shed, and more than 20,000 square meters of manufacturing space. Home to some of Europe's largest CNC machines, capable of precision-cutting components up to 30 meters long. A 300-ton travel lift can hoist yachts up to 210 feet clean out of the water. This is no longer a scrappy workshop experiment squeezed into leased halls. This is heavy industrial infrastructure built to rival the oldest, most established names in yachting history. Macro loop resolved. The industry that told Francis Lap's company wouldn't survive 2 years was wrong by roughly 2 decades and counting. By 2024, Sunreef has sold more than 570 yachts, sailing and power combined, now cruising in oceans across every continent, and Lap still isn't finished expanding. In 2020, he chooses the United Arab Emirates as the base for Sunreef's next phase of global growth, targeting Asian and Middle Eastern markets the Polish shipyard alone couldn't easily reach. In 2022, the company partners with Ras Al Khaimah to build an entirely new production facility from the ground up. By March 2023, Sunreef officially opens an office on Palm Jumeirah in Dubai. The company that started in one leased shipyard hall now runs 2 full manufacturing sites on 2 different coastlines, with a combined workforce approaching 3,000 people worldwide. Final curiosity injection. The newest chapter of this story might be the strangest one yet. Sunreef's Ultima line, a hybrid design fusing monohull elegance with catamaran stability, has already sold 45 units before the first deliveries even leave the yard. Clients are now commissioning 140-foot super yachts, 3 of them sold before construction has even finished. And the company is preparing to unveil its first hydrogen-powered sailing yacht, an 80-footer, pushing the exact same argument Lap first made, standing alone on an empty dock in Cannes over 20 years ago, that nobody has actually finished inventing what a catamaran is capable of becoming. There's a strange, quiet irony sitting underneath the entire Sunreef story, one that's easy to miss if you only look at the finished empire. The industry that dismissed catamarans as inherently unluxurious never actually stopped to ask why that belief existed in the first place. It wasn't physics holding multi-hulls back. It wasn't performance. It was simply that nobody with real design ambition had ever bothered to try building one properly. Francis Lap wasn't a naval architect. He wasn't a lifelong sailor. He wasn't even from the yachting world at all. He was an engineer who got frustrated that the boat he personally wanted to buy didn't exist yet, and decided that frustration was reason enough to build a shipyard. Sometimes the entire history of an industry standard turns out to be nothing more than a gap nobody had gotten around to filling. Someone just has to be stubborn enough, or naive enough, to walk onto an empty dock, watch everyone walk past, and fill that gap anyway.